although the word psychotherapy in Greek means soul healing, very few psychotherapists are actually doing that, except for the ones that work here, of course. They told me that they do that. So, and so now that the spirit of the perpetrator is in the person, in the spirit of the individual that is still holy and sacred, that spirit knows what needs to happen, but because we have forgotten our original instructions, because a lot of us hadn't been taught how this works, the individual is fooled into thinking that they can get rid of this spirit by killing it, or by throwing it out or doing something to it. And the attempt of killing the spirit of the perpetrator, the person also misinterprets that, and what they end up doing is thinking that by killing themselves in some self-destructive way, that they can get rid of the perpetrator. And so this is where I believe a lot of these self-destructive behaviors like addictions and self-violence and suicide and depression are a direct result of the individual not understanding that their spirit really wants to deal with this other energy that's in them, because they don't know the rules. Nobody has ever talked to them about this. And so that's why it's so important that the young people are really taught these things, so that when they confront these things, they'll understand it for what they are, and then they'll be able to go to somebody that can actually help them with it. And so if the person internalizes all that energy, they self-destruct, they end up killing themselves. And like when Dr. Schindler was reporting the suicides, she says there was also 4 or 5 deaths related to automobile accidents. Well, a lot of those deaths are also suicide, except we don't count them as that, because we'd rather think that there's just an accident. But a lot of those accidents are the person taking an extra risk because they don't want to be here anymore. And again, it's an unconscious attempt at destroying that perpetrator. And the other type of individual, when in their attempt of destroying this energy, what they do is they project it out. And so what they do is they see the perpetrator in one of their relatives, and then they proceed to do violence to that relative. And sometimes in hurting that relative or in killing that relative, it's a way of killing themselves, because we're not separate. And so when they kill that relative, they fool themselves into thinking that they're killing the perpetrator. But the perpetrator is still alive and well, and still in the community, going out and doing more terrible things to the community. And so that's kind of the understanding that I have as to how the spirit of violence is transmitted, because violence itself is a spiritual entity, and it is hearing what we're talking about right now. I mean, we're talking here in Kayenta, the spirit of violence has been here visiting different people, and so now we're saying these words in this air. So now the spirit of violence knows that some people know who it is, and so that could really change things. But we also need to do something about it. Somebody needs to do the prayers and the healing of the spirit of violence, and then trace it back to its origin and who brought it here. Because what has been happening here is not a traditional Navajo situation. And so something came in from the outside to cause it to be that way. And that's why I think this morning I asked some of the kids, if this was 250 years ago, would we be here talking about this? And they all said, no. So they absolutely know that, guess what? This is not our stuff. This was imported from somewhere, and it's very real now, and now we have to deal with it. So the children knew the answer to that question. And I really think it's important that we also know that it's not our way. It's not our way of being, and it's not part of our original instructions that came to us when the Creator made us. There's instructions that were given to all people as to how we're supposed to live within a natural law. And if that natural law is violated, then it works instant. It does things. Because the natural law is not judgmental, it just balances itself out. It's just a matter of balancing. And a lot of times that's what's been happening. And then there's a lot of people that end up sacrificing themselves because we don't understand and we have forgotten the original instructions that that we're supposed to be living with. And whatever symptom is being treated, I could safely say that you can always trace it to historical trauma. And then trauma also is not just personal, but it also has a collective flavor to it. And like what Dr. Schindler was talking about, the long walk. See, that was big sorcery. See, because it was done to a whole group of people. I think she said there was like 9,000. So for somebody to be able to throw sorcery at 9,000 people, that means they have big, very bad medicine. And so people like Kit Carson and people that were in charge of him, these are the people that brought in that real collective witchcraft and threw it on people. And we can trace it even beyond him. I mean, who gave it to him? See, and so it goes back. And then the other thing that is really important to know, that I'm kind of realizing more and more, is that because as human beings, we are the earth, we're not separate. Whenever we hurt human beings, we hurt the earth also. And so now the earth is hurt, and the earth has a fever, and they call it global warming or something like that. But she has a fever, and we all know what a fever means. It means there's an infection somewhere, right? And so we need to heal that infection. Otherwise, the earth is going to continue to get hotter and hotter, and eventually then we won't be here, because the earth will heal herself, through fire. Which, by the way, that's probably the fire drill that we had earlier. Remember when I asked people, what was that about? Because at the beginning of the last talk, all of a sudden there was a fire drill, and I kept wondering, what was that about? But it could have something to do with the earth having a fever. And so, what I just said, there's a lot there. Because you've been very quiet, anybody want to say something? Christians can say amen or aho, or say you're right or you're wrong or you're full of crap or whatever you want to say. Is it making some sense? Because it's a lot, and I want it to settle in a way that you can be with it and it's not be too crazy, because a lot of what I'm saying is pretty far out. And this healing the earth thing, a lot of the communities that I'm going to, they tell me, and everybody knows in the communities, I was way up above the Arctic Circle a few months ago, and I was talking to some of those Eskimo people, and I asked them, well, did anything happen here? Because I really didn't know any other history. And everybody knew exactly what happened. They said, well, there's a place, so many miles over there. Nobody goes over there. I said, well, how come? They said, because terrible things happen over there. And I said, well, then somebody needs to go heal that place. And they were like, well, yeah, how come we didn't think of that? I said, well, because you need to have an outsider come and tell you stuff. Otherwise, it's hard to believe it. And so places that I go, that's what happens, to where people are actually taking upon themselves, because as Native people, also kind of caretaking the earth. So part of our work is also to heal her, because when we heal her, then we heal ourselves. And so this kind of gets me into the